All right, let's jump right in. We're about to go on this incredible 100-year quest, a journey to figure out the system that, believe it or not, rules all of our money.
It all really kicks off with a super simple question. Ever wonder why you can't just use, say, dollars to buy a pint in a London pub? It feels like an obvious thing, right? But the answer is anything but simple.
It's because, well, the world needs a system to exchange all that money. And the way that system works, it's making you richer or poorer every single day. See, anytime you want to do anything across a border, trade, travel, invest, you've got to swap currencies. And the rules for that swap, that's the international monetary system. And it has this massive impact on your wallet, even if you never ever leave your hometown.
So what we're looking at here is the story of a 100-year search for the perfect system. But here's the kicker. It's a search that's completely defined by one single, impossible choice.
Okay, so let's get into it. This is the great economic trade-off, the impossible choice.
So at the very heart of this whole thing is the exchange rate. It's really just the price of one currency in terms of another. Think about it like, how many yen can you get for $1? That's it. And these transactions are happening billions of times a day, creating this giant, always moving global market.
And this is where that impossible choice really comes into focus. You basically have two extremes. On one hand, you've got a fixed system. Here, currency prices are locked in. This is amazing for stability, right? It's great for trade, for investment, but the catch is your government basically gives up control over its own economy. Then, on the other hand, you have a floating system. Prices are changing all the time. This gives your government total freedom to fight things like unemployment or inflation, but it creates a ton of uncertainty. So what's it going to be? Stability or autonomy? Because, and this is the key, you can't have both.
All right, so to really see how this choice plays out in the real world, we got to understand how countries, keep score. And that scorecard is called the balance of payments. It's basically an accounting device that records all the international transactions a country makes. We're talking everything. Every car that's imported, every stock that's purchased, every single dollar of foreign aid that's sent out into the world.
The best way to wrap your head around it is to think of it like an annual bank statement, but for a whole country. And if there's a deficit, well, that just means you spent more money abroad than you earned from abroad. Simple as that.
And we are not talking about small numbers here. Just look at 2020. The U.S. had a current account deficit of over $600 billion. That means it spent way more abroad than it earned. A gap that big, well, it has consequences. And that brings us to a huge turning point in this story.
So let's jump in our time machine and go back to the end of World War II. The global economy was an absolute mess, and world leaders knew they had to come up with a better system. That brings us to the Bretton Woods Compromise. So in 1944, folks from 44 different nations all got together, and their goal was honestly incredibly ambitious. They wanted to design a system that could somehow give them the best of both worlds, both stability and domestic autonomy. They were trying to solve that impossible choice.
And their plan was actually pretty clever. First, they came up with fixed but adjustable exchange rates. So you had stability, but you could still change things in a crisis. They also put in controls on big international money flows to prevent chaos. Then they created a stabilization fund, like a big pot of currencies to help countries that got into trouble. And to top it all off, they created a referee, the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, to watch over the whole thing. It was this brilliant compromise, at least on paper.
But, and there's always a but, right? This whole ambitious system had a fatal flaw, a paradox that was baked right into its core, and it all revolved around one thing, the US dollar. See, for the world economy to grow after the war, it needed liquidity. It needed cash to finance all that trade, and that cash was the US dollar. The only way to get more dollars out into the world for everyone to use was for the United States to send them out by spending more abroad than it earned. In other words, the system depended on the US running these big balance of payments deficits.
And that created a massive problem, something called dollar overhang. Here's how it worked. Every US dollar out there was supposed to be backed by gold sitting in American vaults. But as the US kept sending more and more dollars out into the world, it got to a critical point where foreign countries held more claims on US gold than the amount of gold the US actually had.
And look at this number, it's kind of staggering. By 1970, there were $47 billion in foreign hands, all of which could theoretically be exchanged for US gold. The big problem?
The US only had about $11 billion worth of gold left in its reserves. The whole system was basically running on faith and fumes at this point.
You can probably guess what happened next. This created some serious political tension. Other countries, and France was especially vocal about this, were not happy at all. They looked at the US being able to just print the world's money and run these huge deficits and called it an exorbitant privilege.
So the stage was set for a major showdown. The system was at a breaking point, and everybody knew that whatever the fix was, it was going to hurt.
So the big question became, who was going to pay the price to fix these imbalances? Should the United States, the country with the deficit, deliberately cause a recession at home to shrink it? Or should countries with big surpluses, like Germany and Japan, accept a bunch of inflation to get their books in order? Someone had to give in.
And nobody blinked. The US absolutely refused to torpedo its own economy. And on the other side, Germany and Japan, who had these awful memories of hyperinflation, refused to let their economies overheat. So you had a complete standoff, a political deadlock.
And then, just like that, the whole thing came crashing down. In August 1971, you get the Nixon shock. The US just suspends the dollar's link to gold. Done. They tried a last-ditch effort to glue it all back together, but that failed. By March of 1973, the Bretton Woods system was officially dead. The grand experiment was over, and the world's major currencies were basically forced to float.
But here's the crazy part. The story doesn't actually end there. That exact same conflict that doomed Bretton Woods, the deficit countries versus the surplus countries, it's still at the very heart of today's global economy.
And that leaves us, even today, with the exact same really tough question. When the global economy gets out of balance, who should be the one to pay the price to fix it? Is it the country spending too much or the one saving too much? After more than 50 years, the search for that answer, well, it's still going on.